Well, everyone, welcome to something new that me and Chris Johnston are going to try here. It feels like it's been about 1,000 days since we've had any hockey action. We've had some hockey news, but we wanted to bring you a little bit of extra hockey talk. So, Chris, I welcome you on, and I think we just kind of get things started with talking a little bit about our past covering the team, and how many years have you had the luxury and the ups and downs of covering the Maple Leafs?
Well, at the risk of really dating myself, the first time I got to go cover a game, I was a summer student at the Canadian Press, the National Newswire Service, and I covered Game 5 of the second round in 2002, which was Leafs Senators. That was the first time I got to go to the press box at an NHL game. That, of course, is the night that Daniel Alfredsson hit Darcy Tucker from behind and scored the winning goal about 10 seconds later.
A hit on the boards, a Leaf player is hurt. The play goes right on, they score! Ottawa scores a goal, and a Leaf player nailed along the boards from a check from behind is still down. This crowd is pretty angsty.
I've actually since had some laughs with that, with Daniel, just that was my first game and kind of the chaos around that series. And really probably certainly since the 04-05 season was lost to a lockout, I've been around the Leafs pretty regular through that whole time. So I've seen the gamut, and what I haven't really seen too much from them is a playoff series victory in that period.
So basically what you're saying is you're old as dirt, taking this little trip down memory lane, dating yourself.
I like that. I appreciate that, bud.
It's good. I've been covering the Leafs probably for about 7 years now, which has been an up and down ride, not nearly as long as you. And I know that Leaf fans are an interesting bunch. They're a little on edge all the time. They've been through a lot. They've had lots of ups and downs. Their cruising altitude is almost nervous, anxious, and Steve Dangle being the example.
Is there a trade? No. Is there a trade? No. Is there a trade? Yes! Oh my God! The Leafs traded enough! Holy cow! John Tavares is a Leaf! Oh my! John Tavares!
It's a tough life being a Maple Leafs fan. So our first topic of this show is we're going to list what we feel to be the three craziest moments.
And the place goes crazy!
That we've had the luxury of covering. Being a reporter means you get behind the scenes access, you get to see stuff that maybe the average fan doesn't, you get opportunities to do things that maybe the average fan doesn't get to do. So we thought we would share some of those moments with you. So without further ado, we'll start with number 3 craziest moment we've been a part of covering the Maple Leafs. Chris, what is number 3 on your list?
Well, I should say, Shawn, when we first came up with this, I had about 15 to 20 off the top of my head. So there was a real list. And look, crazy can be taken a couple different ways. And obviously there can be a negative connotation, but there can also be a positive connotation. And for me, number 3 is Auston Matthews' debut, because, there's so often you cover a game like this. And honestly, the storyline's almost a little bit boring by the time you get to the day. I mean, at the time Auston came in, the Leafs hadn't had a number 1 overall draft pick since Wendell Clark. So obviously, his arrival in 2016 was a big deal for the organization. You go through the summer, you're talking about him. In that case, there was a World Cup. He played for Team North America at what was then called the Air Canada Centre. So by the time you get to that first game in Ottawa, you've said an awful lot about Auston, and there's probably nothing new to say. And then he goes out and does that.
Matthews scores! What a goal! Matthews! Wow! A hat trick! Oh my goodness! He scores! Incredible! 4 goals! What a debut!
And so, for me, everything about that experience was pretty surreal watching. I remember Brendan Shanahan and the Leafs management was up behind where I was in the press box. And I think that they were trying really hard, because they know in those situations that the camera comes on them, obviously, on the broadcast. I think they were trying hard not to be fist pumping in the press box or getting too carried away outwardly. But, certainly that felt like such a huge moment, sort of symbolically, for the Leafs organization, and obviously a special moment for Auston and his family that they'll never forget.
Oh, I think, I'm not a very sentimental guy. I'm not one of those guys that necessarily keeps all his media passes. I know some guys do that, and it's amazing when you see like the big stacks of credentials that people have and all the different events. And I've never really been that type of person. I'm not organized enough, really. But I remember they handed out something in the press box. And for people who don't know, when you go to playoff games or season openers or special events, all-star games, they come to the press box and they give out some swag, and whether it's a towel, a t-shirt, and most of the time you look at it and go, I can't fit this in my luggage. I'm not taking it home. But I actually found this today. And I remember getting it and thinking, oh, I will lose this. I'm just going to
I've got it too. We haven't even rehearsed this. I know exactly what it is.
I was going to tell you. And I remember looking at it after he scored the first one, the second, and the third one, and then the fourth, and going, well, I'm going to keep this. And for some reason, it just felt special. The pin that they handed out from October 12th, 2016, and just me being a non-sentimental guy, seeing that and thinking it was kind of special, I thought it was kind of cool. But from a reporter standpoint, I remember it was weird because you have to go usually cover the winning team, especially when it's a Canadian matchup. And I remember he got the hat trick and then he got the fourth, and it was just a special feeling. But then the Senators went on to win. So I know Sens fans can get a little bit sensitive because the Leafs take a lot of oxygen in the hockey world, and
rightfully so. We're part of the problem.
Absolutely. But I know people are going to jump on us and blame us, so we are part of the problem. But in that moment, I looked over and felt bad because this first overall sensation gets 4 goals, and I looked over at the Sens dressing room and there was like a little trickle of media going in, even though they won. And then I looked at the Leafs lineup and it was like 50 people long heading in to talk to Austin Matthews. And when you got in, it was strange because it was a dressing room that just lost, their season opener to a rival. And Austin Matthews is talking, and he was on the ice for the game-winning goal against. So he's trying to be serious. Everyone's trying to act like, oh, we lost a tough game. But then there you have Austin Matthews who just scored 4 goals. So it was kind of a weird dynamic in the room, and one that I don't think I'll ever kind of forget. And the interesting thing for Sens fans, and maybe not so interesting, but hurtful, was when you look at who was on the ice for that game-winning goal. Do you remember who was on ice in OT for the Sens game winner?
I know Turris scored it, but I don't remember. It must have been Erik Karlsson, I would think, but I wouldn't know who the third was.
Erik Karlsson, Mark Stone, and Kyle Turris were the 3 that set up that goal, not to upset Sens fans even more than they probably are already upset with some Leafs media. So number 3 on the craziest moments we've covered was a positive one for the Maple Leafs, which there are lots of positives, but Leaf fans also know there are some down moments, Chris. And the Leafs don't seem to do things small. Maybe it's the attention that they get. Maybe we're the problem because the media is so crazy. But when something happens, it usually blows up. So that takes us to the number 2 craziest moment that we've both been a part of. What was it, and what do you remember about maybe one of the strangest news stories we've had around the Leafs in a long time?
Well, it was completely absurd. And it's that moment and that game that's come to be known as Salute Gate.
It's being said that the Leafs deliberately didn't raise their sticks because they were mad at the fans. Good! But the Leafs shouldn't be playing for the fans. They should be playing because they're hockey players, and hockey players should want to win.
For me, Shawn, it's actually Salute Gate week, because I think to understand why the Leafs would ever win a game and not salute their fans in November of a season where they're actually at 500, so it's not as though everything has gone the wrong way at that point, is they play a Saturday game in Buffalo. They lose 6-2. A beer was actually tossed onto their bench, and the Leafs players at the time, I don't know for sure if this was the case, they thought it was from a Leafs fan. So I think they felt a bit under fire. Then they go home, they play a Tuesday game against Nashville and lose 9-2. And so if you're there, you're thinking, like, it can't get any worse than this, the way things are going. Then they actually beat Tampa on the Thursday, and that is the night that they chose not to salute the fans. I still don't really fully understand what went on. And, there's times, look, and again, I'm putting my hand up here. I'm Chris Johnston, and I am part of the problem. I'm not pointing my finger at anyone else, but the media atmosphere around the Leafs sometimes creates controversy. This was one that they created all on their own. I mean, this didn't need to happen. And I remember that night vividly, the way things went down afterwards. And I'm still a little perplexed at how we got to the moment where a team wouldn't salute its fans as it normally does.
I remember that being the weird part, because a lot of what happens, you kind of know why it happened. If a player loses it on a member of the media, or a coach yells at his players, or they, get yelled at in practice, you can always trace back the root of why it happened. But that was one that I remember showing up to the MasterCard Center at the time with the Leafs practice, and like all the news cameras were there, like CP24.
That's a bad sign. That's always a bad sign.
Whenever there's more than one news camera and one news outlet at a Leafs practice, it is going to be a crazy day. And there was it was quadruple the amount of media, but no one knew really what to ask. Because I remember going into the room and we were kind of standing out waiting, and we were like, what are they going to say? Like, how do you sum up not saluting the crowd? And we never really, I remember the explanation was we wanted to change our routine, which right. I don't think anyone to this day was buying. Like you mentioned, there's no real reason for why they would do that at that point of the season. But I remember I felt bad for the Leafs PR guy at the time, because I remember Dion Phaneuf came out, and I think it was one reporter asked him when he said he was going to change the routine. He said, "What's next? Biting the heads off of chickens," which I think is a weird mix-up between.
That might be the weirdest scrum of my life. That's definitely the top 3, hands down.
Because I think that's a mix-up between Ozzy Osbourne biting the head off a bat and Serrano from Major League sacrificing a chicken. It's a weird mashup of. But I think the point is why are you saying you're changing your routine? I don't even know. And then there was a mix-up between reporters in the room. Nobody knew what to ask. It was just a strange day. And I think that whole thing kind of sums up Leaf Nation as a whole, because no one still really knows exactly what happened, but it was about as entertaining as it gets. And
the next day, the one thing you're describing that I remember, Shawn, is Joffrey Lupul was coming back from an injury. And so he had nothing to do with this. He didn't play in the game. He wasn't one, and he was just sitting off to the side because he had a late skate. So he came off the ice late, and he was just looking at everything, just laughing, like, what is this chaos, And we should give credit to Gord Stellick, too. I don't know if people know how this became a story, because I don't know if anyone else would have noticed. Gord was in the building doing the post-game radio show from the press box. In fact, I was on a radio hit with him. I do on Fan 590 here in Toronto, local hits after the game, and he just mentioned this. They didn't salute the crowd, and that seemed to me to be odd. And I actually went out into the hallway, and there was a player there that I had a decent enough relationship with, and I just said, "Hey, is this true?" And he's like, "It's true." And so Gord, maybe if Gord never noticed, this event comes and goes, and we don't have all the chicken and craziness the next day. But, Gord Stellick, former Leafs general manager, at least for me, was the first and only one who actually noticed this in real time.
And I loved it because when you went online and went on Twitter after Gord did point it out, it was like a full forensic file on what happened. They had one, I think was it Cody Franzen?
Cody Franzen didn't look like he wanted to participate, sort of.
Yeah, and then Dion looked like he was going to go salute, and I think it was Phil that was heading off the ice. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we heard from Phil the next day, did we?
I don't remember if we did. I think we would remember if we did in that case. Unfortunately.
I remember interviewing one player, and it was in a big scrum, and I asked a few questions, fair questions, and within about 45 seconds of leaving the room, that guy followed me on Twitter. And I remember just waiting for a DM just blasted, and I didn't know why, and I just waited, and it didn't come. So it was just a weird day all around that I look back on and kind of still laugh. It seems a little surreal, but
I hope you have a long career, because you'll never see something like that again. I promise you that.
Yeah, with the Leafs, I wouldn't rule it out, Chris. Let's not get carried away here. From a funny moment and a weird one to one that Leaf fans are really going to get mad at us for bringing up, the number one crazy moment that you've covered as a member of the media, what was it?
Game 7 in Boston, 2013.
Sorry, everyone.
And Toronto has a 4-1 lead. They score! Lucic scores! With under a minute to go. Screen shot, scores!
Bergeron scores! Patrice Bergeron with the point of the dagger at their throats. They rip it out of Toronto's hands and kill the beast.
We're sorry.
I mean, you can't ignore the obvious sometimes. So much has been said about that game. I don't know how much we can really add, to be truthful, but it had never happened in NHL history. A team leading by 3 goals in the final period had lost the game in a Game 7. All sorts of stuff went into that series. I mean, that series was like the mountain peaks, for one side, and then like the depths of the ocean between. Boston really probably was expected by most to roll over Toronto in that series. They won Game 1 handily. The Leafs come back and win Game 2. It goes back and forth. The Leafs are down 3-1. They rally to tie it up. And oddly, Game 6 and Game 7, there's no day in between. So Game 6 was here in Toronto, and then Game 7 was the very next night in Boston. And we know what happened on the ice. But, that's – for me, it's the craziest moment just because there's really nothing to say after that. And when we talk about, like, the dressing room scene, all the players, to their credit, came out and were just falling on the sword. I remember walking by one of those rooms, Shawn, in the hallway there at TD Garden in Boston, and just looking in, and it was just the Leafs management. Dave Nonis was a GM at the time, and some of the coaches, and they were just staring at each other. It's almost, they're really, there's just shock, and there's not too much to say after that kind of loss. But, certainly among events that I've covered or I've witnessed, that will probably stay in my memory as well as the most unusual, unexpected thing you see.
Yeah, that one's right up there for me, because it just so happened to be that was my first week covering the Maple Leafs. I was out in Winnipeg covering the Jets, and I got moved back home to cover that series. And I remember just thinking how amazing it was. I get to cover, I was the second reporter. Rashman Danny was the main guy. I was covering the Bruins side. He was covering the Leafs. So he was actually in Boston, but I got a call from one of the bosses about probably halfway through that game saying, well, it looks like the Leafs could win this one. And if they do, that the Rangers Leaf series is all yours. So as a young reporter, that's like the dream. Like, you're getting a Leaf series. It's huge publicity. It's, huge exposure. And you get to go to Manhattan, which is by far one of my favorite cities in the world. So I'm sitting there going, this is great. Like, I'm going to get to cover the Leafs. I'm going to get to go to Manhattan. I'm going to be the only guy covering this series. And then, like, they score one to make it a little closer. Like, it won't happen. And then another, and then all of a sudden it ends, and I'm sitting there just like dumbstruck. Like, so I can imagine how Leaf fans felt. I had a little bit of vested interest, but then I remember getting a call right after from the same boss saying, well, the good news is you're still going to cover something. Can you actually rent a car tomorrow and drive to Pittsburgh for the Pittsburgh Senators series? So it was flying, to cover a Maple Leafs Rangers series. I got to end up covering something, but in the moment I was like, you gotta be kidding me. So I feel for Leaf fans. The good news is, though, is that pain that they felt losing to the Bruins in the Game 7, they didn't feel it again anytime soon.
Well, and look, for me, it's one of the great what ifs. I mean, what is sport if not looking back and wondering what might have been? To me, maybe if that team wins, they don't go along the path they did, which is, ultimately hiring Brendan Shanahan, entering a rebuild, getting the star players they have today. I mean, I think that there's a fair argument to be made that the team they have now, which to my eyes, even though they haven't still won a playoff series, is one of the few organizations we can point to and say have a great chance at winning a cup in the next 5 years. I'm not sure they end up with that team today had they won that game, because I think management would have made different decisions and ownership. And so, maybe ultimately whenever this chapter is finished, this long chapter, people can look back on that in a different way.
Well, Chris, we could have chosen from a few hundred different topics. We boiled it down to 3, and we hope fans enjoyed the little trip down memory lane, and we hope you don't hate us too much for taking you through some of the maybe more heartbreaking Leaf memories. But Chris, thanks for taking the time, sharing some stories, and we'll do this again soon.
Yeah, I promise more positivity in episode 2. We'll find a little different way to get at this.
We'll do our best. Thanks, everyone.